it's so much different. The things that you've done and the way you've lived your life. There's no words to explain the feeling of that epiphany. I grew up the youngest of 4 siblings, and I was living with my mom and dad as well. We lived out in the country, outside of a town of less than 1,000 people, so it was very rural. And the very, very earliest memories are pretty positive, though I don't have very many of them. I just remember the sun and plants and animals, because we had a dog and cats, and it was kind of like our own little wonderland, or my own little wonderland, going out into the forest, and I loved it. I remember starting school was very difficult for me. I always, as far back as I can remember, have had social anxiety and just trouble fitting in the sense that I was never like other kids. The way I saw things and the way I thought about things and processed things, and my viewpoint on the world was just clearly not the same. And I had different talents than them. I would draw and make these very realistic looking portraits and things from a very young age, and I just remember at school my classmates kind of crowding around me and watching that because they didn't know how I did it. And home life, my parents were very strict, and it more so came upon my dad to hold that responsibility over us. He was very devout in the Lutheran religion, and he also had a status at the school that I attended in leadership, so he was involved with that. He was gone working a lot, but we had a lot of rules, and so I felt like a lot of expectations were put upon me. We were forced to attend church every single Sunday. There was Wednesday night service, and I think sometimes Saturday, and little things here and there. And from my first experiences when I was very little going to Bible school and such, I actually had a pretty positive time, and I had an overall okay feeling about it. Now, as things progressed and I got older, coming up upon maybe age 12-ish, that is when a lot of things started to change for me. I started feeling like the pressure of maintaining perfect academics and just overall succeeding in everything I was doing. I felt like it wasn't good enough, and I felt like I wasn't ever going to be good enough. That's how I felt. I felt like I would never be enough for what was expected of me, and I was already the best in what I was doing in many categories. So around the age of 12 or so, I started getting involved with darker things. And I remember at the time, one of my brothers was delving into witchcraft or wizardry, I'm not, whatever you want to call it. And he had tarot cards, and he started trying to read different books with like Aleister Crowley and such. And I remember being kind of intrigued by that. So I remember I started to look up things about it and to see if any of it was real, if any of it worked. And I remember trying to cast spells from these little internet websites back in the day. And this was probably in 2005-ish. And I remember one day, it's all such a blur, but I think that was the beginning of opening, the key to the bottomless pit, so to speak. Because things only got worse from there. I started feeling worse and worse. I started becoming extremely rebellious against my parents. I didn't want to go to church anymore because it was forced upon me and I wanted to make my own decisions. As much as I resisted, my parents, of course, would try to push back with stricter rules, and it was a vicious cycle. So I began sneaking out to hang out with boys, being promiscuous. I started drinking alcohol, stealing alcohol. I started shoplifting a lot in general. I started self-harming. And kind of indulging in just a very dark realm of darker music, and my art became more sinister looking, and the poetry I would write began to be very ominous. And I remember having these horrible, horrible night terrors, and I started having supernatural experiences. I would have dreams where an object in my room, to be specific, it was this doll I had, and this doll freaked me out. It was one of those really big, life-sized, like Raggedy Ann type of dolls, but they were probably 4.5 feet tall. And this thing, I kept having nightmares about it, and it would just scare me to death. Well, it had a hanger hook on it, kind of like a coat would. For some reason, the doll had one of those. And I hung it up on one of my walls, kind of across the room from my bed, because I don't know why I did that. That's actually a good question. But I was scared of this thing. I had it hung up on this nail, and it had been there for probably a few days or weeks. And I had this nightmare one night that this doll was swinging on the swing set at my school. And I approach it. And before I knew it, because I think it asked, like, do you want to play with me? So I approach it. And as soon as I get close enough, it takes a knife out and tries to stab me. Well, I woke up from my dream at that exact moment that it tried to stab me. And in real life, this doll had fallen off of that nail, and it was face first, fell down near my bed. So that was one of the things that happened. And there were other things like that. I had an attic in my closet. Kind of a strange construction, but that's how it was. I would always shut the attic and make sure it was locked with these, we had little latches. I would latch it and I would shut my closet door all the way. And I would always have dreams of these. There was no visible, really, it was like a black, dark, black, dark mass of smoke. Just a dark energy. That's the right description, because it really held no true form. It was just basically dark energy, and it would emit this feeling. Well, and they still do these things. They emit this just the worst feeling of doom and of utter terror and hopelessness and evil. And I would have dreams where they would come out of my attic door and through my closet into my room. And I had woken up before, after one of those terrible dreams, to my closet being rolled open about half a foot and the attic latches were unlatched. I forgot to include a few other experiences that had to do with electronics in my room turning on by themselves, such as the TV, and the alarm clock would randomly go off in the middle of the night when it hadn't been set. And yeah, the TV sometimes would just turn on by itself completely out of nowhere, blaring full volume, just that screen of static. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's like grayish dots all over the screen, and it just goes shh, and it was full volume. It was terrifying. There was also an experience where I left my room normal. We were going on vacation, and I had this dresser that was propped up against the wall as always. And I had a glass of orange juice I must have forgotten on this dresser. Well, I shut my bedroom door. We go on vacation for a few days, and when we get home, I open my bedroom to find that the dresser that had been up against the wall had somehow tipped forward and crashed onto the TV stand and tipped over the TV. And that orange juice was everywhere, and it obviously was dry at that point and sticky, but no one had been in our house. And I don't know how you explain a dresser that's up against a wall falling forward. It was crazy. And this is when, I knew the spirit world was real, and I always did, and maybe I should say I did have one before all of this, I believe, a very, very quick glimpse of the other side. I was reading some book, I think the author was Max Lucado and something like that, but again, I was probably 11 or maybe just turned 12, and it was talking about Jesus in there, and I now I know I felt the Holy Spirit, but at the time I didn't know what it was, and I remember looking over to this chair I had in the corner of my room, and I felt him. I felt his presence, and it was just so wonderful and warm and love and free and the opposite of the terrible feelings. But it was only for a split second and it was gone. And at the time, I then continued on the wrong way. And so I was having these disturbing experiences with night terrors, and I was submerged in this very dark world of destruction. And my parents really didn't know what to do with me. I had suicidal thoughts. Trying to think if there's anything I'm missing about that time. I also had an eating disorder where I basically ate nothing, and if I did eat something, I would throw up. I was very good at track and field, at running. I was very fast, and I was the fastest girl. So anyways, I would run all the time, and I got quite thin, and it was just part of this weird lifestyle I was living. I was just lost in darkness, but I thought that I was finding something, and that is the interesting part. I became slowly convinced that being outside of the norm and outside of the box was the right thing to be doing. And it's interesting because I do still feel that way, but not to work for the enemy now, of course. Because I always knew, though, that something weird was going on with the world, and I didn't agree with these pre-constructed systems that I had been born into. And I just felt like there's more that meets the eye on every front. So yeah, anyways, just all the weird things were happening. I had a dream that there were 3 dead black crows, I believe it was, in this very specific spot in the barn. And I went the next morning down into the barn, and there was one dead crow in that exact spot, and it freaked me out so bad because I started realizing, like, this shouldn't happen. Why would I have this dream that basically came true? And I remember calling my friend and just being completely bewildered and amazed and astonished at this. And, I'm 13, and of course she doesn't know what to make of it either. And that same friend, actually, her and I tried doing the Ouija board at her house. And so I was just doing all types of things that I shouldn't. And it's sort of out of order because it's such a blur, but eventually my parents decided that I need to be going to a girls' group home to try to, fix what's going on with me. And just to be clear, they wanted me to get help on my behavioral issues because there was nothing that they could do that was stopping me from being rebellious, and they just didn't know how to fix it. And of course, that was a complete disaster. I just ran away. I ended up going to multiple more facilities. Eventually, I became like a ward of the state, I think is the right term. And so the state technically had custody of me because my parents couldn't fix me. Nothing was working, no amount of therapy, forced medication, that wasn't working because to this day, I don't agree with trying to alter your brain chemistry. And I always knew that is something I never wanted. So I was just trying to figure it all out, but I was so resistant against anyone trying to change anything about me, and I would not give in to the system no matter what. So I live in this residential treatment center for, I think it was 10 months when I was 13 or maybe very early 14 years old, unsuccessfully discharged. It was not a good facility overall. It's since been shut down for malpractice, basically, because it was really messed up. And I guess, I'm not going to talk more about that, but so that just stuff like that on and off up until I was 18. I think in total I went to 5 different facilities in, 5 years or something, and never was successfully discharged. Always tried to put me on different medications, and I ended up in JDC at one point. That's juvenile detention. And this whole time, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want people controlling me. I just wanted to live my life and take my own path. I had attended a few different schools as well because I kept getting bounced around here and there. We ended up moving to a different area altogether. Same old behavior for me. And I had this big party. My parents left town one night, and I had this big party, and we broke into my dad's alcohol stash and, drank a whole bunch of it. And the next morning they came home, and that day happened to be my 18th birthday. And my dad had seen what happened, and he kicked me out of the house on my 18th birthday. So I decided to live with friends for a while. We just drank so much. So I lived with this friend for probably at least 6 months. And he eventually, I didn't like him as more than a friend. So when he figured out, this isn't going to work for me to be with you, he decided he was going to move to a different state to be with this other girl. So then I was just living there with his parents and his family for a little while. And I thought, well, I need to figure out something here. I remember going and getting job applications, but then just never turning them in because I was too scared. I just had this anxiety, this social anxiety, that I just felt like I couldn't do it. But I eventually decided I have to do something. Well, I always had cut my own hair, and it was fun for me. So I thought, maybe I'll become a hairdresser and I can cut hair. Well, so I started going for that. But I quickly realized, it's not a creative, fun job. It's pretty mechanical. I mean, you're going to do a set amount of haircuts and you basically do it by the book. And I just saw my future as being this kind of slave in a sense, and seeing that that's all I would do day in and day out is cut hair. And I just like doing it sometimes for fun, and but the main thing was, so during this college experience, again, drinking all the time and just doing things I shouldn't be doing, I was dating this boy that I had met when I was 14. I was now 18. And he grew up near where I grew up. And so on the weekends, I would go and I would see him. And we would just drink and party. And I'm going to the classes, and it was the next day that we were going to have to start actually demoing our hair cutting skills on real people on the floors, I think what they called it. So we were going to have people come in and we would actually do haircuts on those people. And I believe they got like a discount because it was students giving the haircuts. Well, I couldn't do it. That anxiety hit and I couldn't do it. I decided that was going to be it. I can't, I quit. And I moved in with that boy who I told you about, who I was dating at the time. And I kind of already knew that I was going to be quitting. So of course I had this idiotic plan of the world of webcamming. So I thought, okay, well, I can make like so much money and I don't even have to go to college, and I don't have to waste my time doing stuff that's mundane and boring day in and day out. I can just go on the internet and these guys are going to give me all this money just to like show my body, right? I decided that I'm going to do that because I don't know what else to do. My parents have kicked me out. They won't talk to me even. I don't want to go back to that friend's house. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do with my life. So I moved in with him, and we spent every single night getting completely wasted and like playing video games. And I started doing that webcam thing, but not often because I didn't really, I didn't want to do that. It's not like that was my life goal or anything. I just didn't know what else to do, and that's the only way I felt like I could make money. Now, more supernatural things started happening around this time. And one of the nights, I was in the garage with him where we would have this little party area set up where we would drink and play video games and play pool and stuff. And I decided as I was drunk that I was going to make an Ouija board out of paper. And so I make it, and it's like literally just a piece of paper with letters on it. It's stupid. And nothing happens. I try to interact with it. It literally does nothing. Well, the guy who I was dating decided to go inside to the house. So I was just out there in the garage with this piece of paper. And all of a sudden, I hear this crazy noise on the top of the ceiling, like something running across the walls. Like, almost as if it was like running across the tops of the walls or something, this crazy noise. And it scared me to death. So, I sprint out of there and go inside. So shortly after that experience, though, so I was saving up this little bit of money I had, waiting for us to be able to move so we could live by ourselves. And we started having this thing happen after, I believe it was after that stupid Ouija board thing, where we'd go to bed, and we lived, it was at his parents' house at the time, and it was an old house, but the door of the bedroom we were sleeping in was like a circular knob. You'd have to, grab the whole thing and twist it and really push the door open quite hard, because it was like the wood had settled in a way that it was a little bit stuck. This is an old home. So we were sleeping in there, and really early in the morning, it was probably around, 4 a.m. or something, the door had opened and was creaking open. And it just was open a little bit. So we're like, oh, weird. I guess like your mom or dad was checking on us. So we go downstairs later when we're up, and we ask them, like, did you guys open the door? And they said no. So we're like, okay, well, that's weird, whatever. So we go up there and we test it, and we're like, well, if it, how could it have just come open a little bit? We try to see if there's a way we can position the door to make it just do it again, and or if you touch it just right. No, you have to twist it a lot and push quite hard. There's really no other way, and it can't be half open or half shut. The lock didn't work like that. So we go to bed the next night, and same exact thing happens at 4 a.m. The door opens. And now we're like, this is super weird. And they had said that they'd had strange things happen in that house before. So I'm like, okay, but this is really weird. I believe it happened a third time about a week after that. And then we ended up moving out. So we're in our own apartment now. It was the first day we had moved in. The first night we're getting ready, we go into the bedroom, we shut the door, we go to sleep. That night, the door opens. Again, I don't know what time. It was sometime in the middle of the night. So it followed us. Luckily, that was the last time that happened, but it was very, very eerie. So now we live in this apartment, and this is it was not good. It was hell. It was definitely, a higher up level of hell, but so I would just get wasted every single night. I didn't want to do the webcam thing anymore, but it was the only source of money that we had. I still had the terrible anxiety. I didn't think I could ever get a real job. So I would just do it the very, very, very bare minimum to be able to pay the rent. I just started feeling like I was totally trapped in this cycle, because I was still self-harming, maybe not quite as intensely. I think the worst of that was when I was, my earlier teens or throughout my teens. But at this time now, I was probably 19. And I was really just drinking myself to a slow death for sure. And I just felt trapped, and I started feeling like just bad, you know, what it's like, this isn't really that fun anymore. Because for a while it was fun when I finally, you know, I was kicked out, but whatever, I'm finally free, I can do what I want. But it only lasted so long. And I can't remember exactly what order things happened in, but I started thinking more about God, because I never didn't think he was real. I just didn't understand. I started having these really strange dreams, and they weren't just the night terrors of demons this time. I started having these dreams that were a little different, and one, I was in this place suddenly where it was all, I don't know what type of rock, like it almost looked like volcanic or something. There was no way out. It was just completely rock chasm. It was very dimly lit, maybe red, and around the edges of this kind of circular structure, there was like hewn in the rock, like a walkway. And it's hard to describe without showing a picture. It was like all along the edges of it, like a slow, like huge spiral walkway that went down. And I was kind of maybe in the midsection of this, on this rock ledge, starting to slowly walk down, and there were a whole bunch of other people there. And I saw that at the very bottom of this was molten lava. And yeah, I mean, it was obvious that it was hell, and that I was walking myself down into the lake of fire. I had a dream where there was this humongous tornado, and it was approaching me, and it was coming to rip me into pieces, and it was the wrath of God. I had a dream where I was in a basement, and it was completely flooding and flooding and flooding with water, and I was drowning. And I had a dream where there was this portal of fire. That's what it was. It was a portal of fire, and I was standing right at it, right in the opening of the doorway. You know, I was standing. You know, so if I'm here, here's the portal. It was that close to me. I was standing in the portal of fire. And obviously it was trying to warn me that that's where I was going. So I became convicted, and I started feeling terrible, but yet I still didn't know how to escape what I was doing. I didn't know how to escape that life. I just felt like I had burned every bridge I'd ever made, and there was no going back, and I didn't know what else to do. So I started crying out to him, like screaming in agony, really, like, God. I'd have these episodes where I would just feel like I was gonna explode from the inside out. Just so much emotion of desperation, helplessness, you know, rage even. Like, help me, you know, like, help me, like, do something. Get me out of this. Well, the year must have been about 2014 at this point. Something bad happened where things were getting violent, and people were getting hurt near where we lived due to, if they would ask, do you believe in Allah? And if you said no, they would try to hurt you. So we're like, well, this is nuts. We got to get out of here. So also around this time, we started selling things, like reselling things. We'd go to the thrift store, find stuff that was worth money, and we would sell it, you know, like on eBay or whatever. And that's what we started doing for money. But it wasn't a ton. So I I was still doing like selling videos and photos as well. But I didn't want to, you know. We're starting to do this reselling thing. And I had gained a lot of weight. So I've always been small. I'm like 5'2" or 5'3", and I got overweight at that time in my life when we lived in that first apartment together, and I was drinking all the time, eating junk food and trying to survive with stupid webcamming crap. I started working out again, trying to lose all that weight, and then we decide we're gonna move. So we move out. I went vegan at the time. That's how I lost most of that weight, combined with running. We finally get another apartment again. By the time we move into that apartment, I am at the lowest weight I've ever been. I was even lower, you know, I weighed less than I did when I had the eating disorder when I was young. It became a big issue because with that whole veganism, I developed food phobias of meat and of fat and of all these strange things. I was in an extremely unhealthy place. I developed all these digestive issues because of what I was and wasn't eating, and I developed extreme joint pain in most of the joints in my body, and I felt horrible. And throughout this, I was still drinking. And luckily, you know, for the most part, we were doing okay with this new business. But I wasn't doing good. I was not doing good with my health. And I still hadn't woken up to the truth of everything going on. I had just kind of started slowly trying to go a better direction, but I was still really broken. It was sometime in early 2017 then, when we live in this second apartment, I start researching stuff on the internet about health. And for whatever reason, this is the time when I started noticing all of these things. It started off with like conspiracies, right? But then it was just people talking about like the healthcare system and what's in our food and what's in our water and all this stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy, but I believe this. I've always known like something is wrong with the world. This is nuts. And one thing led to another, and I'm learning about government and MK Ultra. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that. And the music industry, and there's always religious themes sprinkled throughout all of this stuff. And I'm like, why is this? This is so crazy. And I just started searching and searching and searching, and I started praying. And can you believe it? Jesus Christ is real. Like, he's really real. And once you realize that, like, he really is who he says he is, it hits so much different. The things that you've done and the way you've lived your life. You know, there's no words to explain the feeling of that epiphany. And I just couldn't, you know, I could believe it, but, you know, I was astonished. Oh, I didn't even mention that the boy I was with became my husband after he was saved, which is amazing. So shortly after we were both saved, we got married. And it was a whole new world to me. It was just absolutely amazing. I was just continually astonished at every single new thing I would learn. It was like all these puzzle pieces fitting together about just how sinister the world system is on every level. There is no one else to save you. It's him. And to learn that he loved me and he was always there, I was just so grateful. I saw him now, you know, I always wondered, why didn't you answer me when I was screaming out for help? But He will lead us, but we have to make steps to show that we are serious. And he was there slowly leading me to that moment, to show that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And he's everything to me. Anything that I have, physically, mentally, spiritually, it came from him. It's not mine. We are not our own. And man, I started having the craziest dreams, but this time for the better. I had the authority over these demons, and when they would try to attack me in the dreams, I would say, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. I bind you. I cast you out. I command that you leave. And before the word leave even left my mouth, they would flee. So it was just such an amazing time. And I was so intertwined with the Lord in that period. I finally feel like, you know what? I finally feel like I'm good enough. And that's because he is. I am more than good enough because he has given me everything. And it's not anything I can do to be saved, it's him. Praise Jesus. I guess this is my testimony.